I like NIF. I love it.
Too.
I love it.
I support NIF because it allows me to express my progressive Jewish values.
I support the NIF because of the platform that they give to alternative voices within the Jewish community.
NIF's given us all a home where we can promote an Israel that's true to our values of equality, justice and democracy for all.
NIF is providing much needed resources to Israelis from all sectors of society who are dedicating their lives to making their community a better place. One that is fairer, more compassionate, more democratic and more caring.
NIF supports Israeli activists working on the ground to make change for all.
The projects that NIF supports, I can really get behind. They mean something to me. They're about equality and they're about everyone.
We support NIF because of its values of democracy, fairness, including the rights of LGBT people.
And seeing the really important values-driven work that NIF supports.
My time on the NIF Fellowship showed me the amazing on-the-ground work that is done by civil society organisations which NIF support.
I believe that NIF always put out really interesting and engaging events that tell a different perspective on what's going on in Israel.
And it's been a source of great interest and encouragement for me.
NIF has enriched the Australian Jewish community
because I believe they are working to create a just and equitable society for all those living in Israel and Palestine.
NIF stands as a beacon of hope in these very troubled times in Israel.
NIF for me keeps alive the Israel that I was raised to love and respect.
The NIF makes me proud to be Jewish and Zionist.
It just matches my heart and I'm very grateful to NIF.
Thank you, NIF.
Thanks, NIF.
Well, good evening, everyone. Wow, I really love that video. It's been a wonderful 10 years building this community with you all, and it's nice to be able to shine a spotlight on just a few of our supporters, some people who were there right at the beginning with us 10 years ago, and some people have joined more recently. So thank you to everyone who was part of that video for us. I'm sure you already know by now, but my name is Liam Getreu. I'm the Executive Director of NIF, and I want to welcome you all to our celebration of 10 years of the New Israel Fund supporting justice, equality, and democracy in Israel, all the way from the Jewish community in Australia. One of the things that our Israeli friends always notice when they come here is our acknowledgement of country, which begins every event. And I want to do that now, pay tribute to the traditional custodians of the land, wherever we are right now, and acknowledge that this is Aboriginal land where sovereignty was never ceded. Here in Sydney, I'm the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I want to pay my respect to their elders past and present. Thank you again, everyone, for coming tonight. We've got a really big crowd joining in. We've got hundreds of people, in fact, for this celebration. So thank you for tuning in. It's going to be a little bit of an unusual NIF event tonight. For the last decade or so, we've hosted some pretty extraordinary content, I think you'll agree. Of course, over the last 18 months or so, we've had to do that virtually over Zoom and podcast and YouTube with some of the best minds and some of the most influential people who think, write, and influence policy when it comes to Israel. Usually we get them up on stage, they give a little bit of a talk, we ask them some questions, and we engage in spirited debate. Tonight we've got that as well, but we've also got a mix of some other things. We've got segments from the people that we admire and the people that we like to hear from. We've also got insights into the type of critical work that NIF has invested in over the last decade, the changes that we've made on the ground, the community that we've built in Australia, and critically the path that we have charted for the future. It was 10 years ago that NIF started in Australia with events with Naomi Chazan. She was then president of NIF, and she's, of course, a former deputy speaker of the Knesset. She's also joining us tonight. We had hundreds of people come out to that event. It was for me, and I know many of you also will have felt the same. It was the first time that I felt like I was in a room of allies, a group of people deeply connected to Israel and deeply committed to a shared, just, and equal future for all. We've brought together our allies and our friends for inspiration, like Eurovision performer and award-winning artist Naomi Chazan Reem Younis, our co-patron, Ambassador Martin Indyk, whose voice as a negotiator for two states is respected in Israel and in Palestine, Just earlier this year, we had our friends Sir Simon Sharma and Professor Dipra Lipstadt to speak to us about the rise of extremism and how it shapes our perspectives as Jews and our work as NIF on the ground. One of our community favourites, New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, spoke last year to more than 1,000 people in our community, which was incredible. We've also had leading politicians like former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, now Israeli Minister for the Environment Tamar Zandberg, leading Australian MPs like Tanya Plibersek and Adam Bandt to share their analysis of what the world is like today. And of course, Senator Penny Wong is joining us tonight as well. We've brought our friends and our partners in Israel out to Australia to share their stories and to spotlight their work. One of my personal favourites was the events that we had with Breaking the Silence with their executive director, Avner Gvaryahu, their novelist, Asaf Gavron, and Pulitzer Prize winner, Geraldine Brooks. These conversations that we have aren't easy. In fact, they're actually deeply difficult, but it's only by having the honest reckoning of what's happening on the ground in real life that we're able to shape a better future for all. Importantly, too, we've built up a strong, vibrant new gen cohort, the next generation of leaders in our community, to grapple with those challenging and important questions facing Israelis, Palestinians, and diaspora Jews. Sending them to Israel on a fellowship is one of the main ways that we do it. We send them to meet with inspiring figures like Women of the Wars and Nat Hoffman, and to give them a chance to see up close and personal the reality faced by Israelis and Palestinians and how they can be part of shaping it. I don't want to take too much time before moving on to the next segment, but I do want to reinforce one thing, and that's that none of what we've been able to build, a strong community of thousands of Australian Jews committed to a better future for Israelis and Palestinians, without your dedication and support. So whether you were at those events with Naomi Chazan 10 years ago, or whether this is your first event tonight, I want to say a big thank you. Thank you for being part of our community. The last year in Israel has reinforced to us why our community is so important. It's been a real roller coaster, with a deadly month of violence in Jerusalem and Gaza and in the mixed cities, the reckoning of shared society that followed, and the swearing in of a new government led by someone other than Benjamin Netanyahu. We can now see the light on the horizon. We can see in real time ideas which have been put forward by NIF grantees, which have been ignored for a decade or more, are starting to be shifted onto the desks of senior ministers and brought into focus. That's a power and that's a future that we are optimistic about. Now, every time that we've asked our community to dig deep and support our work, you've responded, and we are so grateful for that. And tonight we're going to be asking you to do the same again. Like never before, we need to bring investment into Israeli society, to bring Jews and Arabs together, to protect Ethiopian kids from being racially profiled or experiencing violence at the hands of police. We need to stop asylum seekers from detention and deportation. We need to stand up for victims of racism and discrimination, bring life-saving healthcare right across Israel and Palestine, and to work towards ending the occupation which dehumanizes Palestinians and is causing damage to Israeli democracy. Now, over the last 10 years, we've invested millions of dollars in civil society in Israel. That's our work. That's the core of it, putting our words and discussions into action. And we'll be telling you more later on in tonight's event about the support that we need to propel our mission forward as we create a more just, equal, and democratic future for Israelis and Palestinians, and safeguard the role that we have in the Jewish community for the next decade to come. But for now, what I want to do is share with you some inspiring and uplifting stories, some words from our friends and our grantees, the projects that we fund in Israel, about the future that they want to see looking 20 years forward. And after that, I'll be joined by two of NIF's global leaders, board members Naomi Chazan and Reem Younis, to take stock of how Jewish Arabs shared society is faring and what we can do to support our allies on the ground. So thanks again for joining us tonight, and stick with us.
Are you ready? The revolution is here. Come on. Yeah.
Just 20 years ago, like Arab Knesset members was so afraid to even think about the word gay. And the fact that today we have a huge Arab LGBT Palestinian parade inside of Haifa, it's such an amazing thing. If you would ask me 20 years ago if this thing will happen, I will tell you never ever. But the fact that today we march, Jews next to Arabs, Palestinians and Israelis in the biggest Arab march in Haifa, it's so amazing.
Imagine, 20 years ago, I couldn't let my son to go out at night. I was afraid that police will kill him. Today, no fear. He can go out anywhere, anytime, and I'm happy about this. about this opportunity to be free in my place.
Yesterday, I've been to this crazy party on this bar on Shulamit Aloni Boulevard. Shulamit Aloni, the Israeli Jewish human rights champion. It's on the crossing with Mahmoud Darwish Street. Darwish, the Palestinian poet. It's the bar where they play Arabic and Yiddish rock. Well, anyway, it was the Bill of Rights Day party, and they had this customary readout of segments of the final report of the Israeli-Palestinian Truth and Reconciliation Committee. You know, the committee that was established when occupation and apartheid ended. And then I thought to myself, we received such a lousy world from our parents, and boy, we are leaving such a great world to our children.
Clean water, pure air, global warming reversed by sun and wind, diseases conquered, famine overcome, the rich fund the poor, no more third world. All governments headed by women, because women care. They care for, they care about. That is why our world in 2040 is a wonderful world.
Yesterday, Ahlam Abdessalam, the mayor of the city of Al-Fahim, the biggest Arab city in Israel, was elected to be chairwoman of the Federation of Local Authorities. This is a huge success. This is something that we could never imagine 20 years ago, because she's not only the first woman to be elected to this position, important position, but she is the first Arab woman to be elected. And she's gonna serve millions of people in Israel, Jews and Arabs.
After we fight for many years for the refugee rights, now in 2014, we, the Hotline for Refugees and Immigrant Workers, happy to see the asylum process in Israel is functioning properly and transparently. Finally, we are very excited to live our life with dignity, with happiness, with all the rights. No more infiltrator, we are human beings.
היום אנחנו ב-2040, אני בגיל 97, עוד 3 שנים אני בגיל 100. אני מקשיב לנכדים והנינים שלי, ויש שם איזה ויכוח, ואני מתקרב לשמוע כי השמיעה שלי לא הכי טובה, ואני פשוט לא מאמין למשמע אוזניי, שהם מתכננים לי טיול, לירדן, לעיראק, לסוריה, ללבנון. מה קרה? הכל פתוח? אני לא מאמין. 100 שנה של מאבק, של שנאות, של הרג, של רצח, של כיבוש. על מה? 100 שנה בזבזנו. איזה אושר זה. אחרי שנים של מאבקים, סוף סוף היה שווה. את כל המאבקים האלה שניהלנו בכדי להגיע ליום הזה, שנוכל באמת לשבת עם השכנים שלנו על כוס קפה ולחייך ולספר סיפורים עד כמה טוב להיות ביחד.
It's crazy to think about it, but 20 years ago, a true collaboration between Palestinian and Jewish artists was almost non-existent. While today you have all these amazing young voices in theater, in hip-hop, in music, really bringing a diversity of voices. 20 years ago, the only true mainstream channel was owned by the Israeli army, and you would hear the same song in Hebrew over and over and over again. And today the #1 hit is by a band called Ba'araf Shich Veis Nicht. It's this amazing Jewish Palestinian band. They were students of us in 2031. And the song goes, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבט אחים גם יחד, תתעורר אסחא יניים ובערף יש פחד, בערף יש חוף, יעני בערף יש פיר, אליס קלור ונדוסיז אלצוד, אלה מול, היר, מיר, זיינן, אלה ברידר, מכיכר השעון לתחריר, גם אם ימשיכו לשקר, גם אם ימשיכו להדיר, احنا جنينة حيوانات, بس عم نمشي على التنتين, وفينا ملك الربي في واحد الأغان. Our city was a cage, now welcome to the lion's den. تسن بريدر, he lost our mama once again. when روحت يا بابا, اتشرفنا أهلين.
Naomi Chazan and Reem Younis are NIF Australia's partners. They're my peers on the New Israel Fund Global Board. Naomi and Reem are 2 women whom I admire enormously. They exemplify how Jews and Arabs can work together in respectful and empathetic ways. We've invited them here this evening to give us their insights and analysis of the trauma that threatened the partnership between Jews and Arabs in the intercommunal riots in May, and how NIF is finding a path forward, turning that partnership into an everyday reality for all Israelis. If we're to realise the Israel imagined by the founders in the Declaration of Independence, Naomi and Reem are the embodiment of that dream. It's my pleasure to welcome them to our celebration of 10 years of NIF Australia.
Thank you, Ilana, for that wonderful introduction. We're going to dive right in, of course. Naomi Chazan is someone who was present at the very beginning of NIF Australia. I want to start with you. Will you talk to us a little bit about your reflections now, a few months on? How did you feel during the violence that erupted inside Israel in May and June? How did that affect your perception of how far shared Jewish Arab society has come in the last 10 years or so?
I had two very different reactions, frankly. I was horrified, but so were many other people. What we saw and what we heard about and what some people experienced was really on the verge of being a nightmare on any scale. It was really so difficult. I can't begin to convey that feeling and sentiment. On the other hand, I must admit I wasn't surprised at all. I constantly, from the word go, asked myself and talked to people around me and said, well, what in the world did we expect? Since the creation of the state, decades and decades and decades of systemic discrimination, which was being perpetuated in recent years by a government that looked at Arab society and Palestinian citizens of Israel as a fifth column and rebuffed them and everything they had to offer to Israeli society. So it was this dualistic reaction that worked with me. I was sick to my stomach. And in a sense, I said, maybe finally we'll reach the point that we have to understand that this can no longer continue. We cannot live in this country by subjugating our own citizens because they are not Jewish. It is the antithesis of who we are and who we want to be.
Reem, were you also not surprised? Did it also was it also inevitable almost in your mind?
I mean, it was maybe at the beginning I was a little bit surprised, I would say. But rethinking it, I mean, it was obvious, almost as Naomi said. So for me, it was really depressing. But from the other side, it was also frightening. Depressing because I saw that all of the work that we've been doing during the last 2 decades, you know, talking about shared society and promoting shared society, everything, you know, just collapsed in 1 minute, and frightened from the way that I saw my own kids, my 25-year-old boy, Jude, who went out to the streets, and suddenly he did not want to hear anything about shared society. And suddenly he was so furious and he went out to the street to demonstrate. So for me, I mean, like remembering May is so depressing. I mean, I'm still having, you know, some nightmares about this, but I think it's exactly as Naomi said, you know, all of this inequality during all the years. I mean, somewhere it exploded last May.
Is it something that you feel like, having had a little bit of time since then, that things have started to go back to normal a little bit? One of the things that we took comfort in so far away was seeing little moments of Jews and Arabs coming together in order to try and stop the violence and to push back against the reality that was unfolding. Have things since then calmed down and begun to be repaired? Reem?
I mean, we saw lots of initiatives, of trying to control this anger. And I believe this is the only time that we saw businesses stepping out and saying, no more. We want a shared society. We want our Arab and Jewish employees to live together. And I would say this is very, encouraging sign. But from the other side, we have to remember that these decisions are taken by government. Like the NGOs, the businesses can help promote an idea. But the huge step and the big step should be done by the government to end the occupation and just bring us a better reality that most of us, this is what we want,
Naomi, what did you feel when you saw those moments of togetherness and those big companies? I think Cellcom was one of the biggest ones who came out and said, this is what we stand for. Did that give you a glimmer of hope that things were actually able to turn around or be pushed back?
I think there's always a glimmer of hope. In Israel, and all Israelis, Arabs, Jews, various groups in the periphery, in the center, there are a lot of very good people. And coming together to say this is unacceptable is important. But to my mind, much more important is the understanding that the terms of exchange have to change. You cannot have a shared society if there are not shared rights. And shared rights are not only respect and equality and social justice, they're also political participation and, yes, being a part of making decisions. And therefore, there have been some steps in that direction, but one has to begin to think that what happened in May will be a watershed only, and I really mean only, if it makes us shift our mindset and begin thinking in terms of what does real equality mean? How is it broken down on a daily basis into activities, into behavior, into conduct, into treatment of the other, into respect, into those kinds of questions? And here, frankly, what gives me the greatest amount of hope is that there are undercurrents that are extremely important, and that Arab citizens of Israel and the Arab community is demanding and beginning to receive what is its due, and that is acceptance on the basis of who they are and what they have to offer, not on the basis of what we think they should do, think, and how we think they should act. And that's where the real hope is. But if the mindset continues, there won't be hope. If this is a turning point, it's necessary.
I mean, you've laid out a path. You've shown us the direction of where things need to go. And one of the things that Reem mentioned was that as much as civil society can help and as much as businesses can help, government is the path that really has to do the heavy lifting here. And so soon after the riots and the violence in May and June, obviously was the war in Gaza. But then right afterwards, there was a new government inaugurated, and the government had, for the first time in a very long time, Palestinian members of the coalition. The first time there was an independent Palestinian party in the coalition. How much is that, Naomi, for you, a marker of showing that things are improving? Like, if this had been still the same old Benjamin Netanyahu government that had been after this, how much would not have changed, and how much would we be on a kind of less productive path going forward?
I really don't deal with what would have been if he'd remained. I'm quite happy that he's no longer the Prime Minister for a variety of reasons. I think breaking that brick wall of not having an Arab party in the ruling coalition is extremely important. But I'm not sure it sets a precedent. It will only set a precedent when perhaps another Arab party is part of the coalition, or when the Arab parties rotate in the coalition. In other words, if it's a one-time deal, it's interesting, it's important, but it's not monumental. What's been happening now in the past few months is, I think, Mansour Abbas is beginning to show that when you do have power, you can do certain things. And that may perhaps penetrate the minds of many, that you cannot talk about me if I'm not in the room. You cannot decide for me if I'm not part of the decision making, and that this is the new norm. So that's why I think it's important, obviously. Where we go from...
Right, that's the question. Reem, what are your reflections on seeing the change? How monumental was it to you, and how precedent-setting is it, seeing what happened with the new government?
I mean, for me, it seems very odd, like, as long as the expectation from the Palestinian citizens of Israel would stay in the categories of that we have to put our nationality aside and feel more about our being an Israeli and less being a Palestinian. And as long as the definition of the country is Jewish and democratic, and not democratic and other things, and as long as the occupation is here and it's not solved, I believe being in the government for an Arab party or a Palestinian party is not going to change a lot. Like, maybe they will be able to do some economic changes, something in the education, but for me, all of these things are like painkillers, while we are not treating the real disease, which is the cancer of the occupation, and solving everything from the beginning. So I don't know how Mansour Abbas feels every day in the Knesset, in the government. I mean, I wouldn't like to be in his place, juggling between my nationality and my citizenship. So, I mean, for me, I prefer if all the Arab parties stay out of the government, but be a very strong, something that can give a contra to the government, working from outside on supporting our daily issues, our community daily issues, till the the occupation and the conflict between the Israeli and the Palestinian is solved. So for me, I'm not optimistic.
Jump in because while I agree with Reem's analysis, my conclusions go in a little different direction. And I think by explaining the paradox of the conflict between being Palestinian and being Israeli, she's also giving us a hint of where I think the solution lies. And I think that we can only, within Israel, resolve this paradox by two things. Number one, we agree on ending the occupation, but much more profoundly, by understanding that only by being Palestinian and recognizing Palestinian identity as a critical part of the mindset of 20% of Israel's citizens, can we expect that they also can be Israeli? In other words, I want to reach the goal of when being a proud Palestinian is an avenue to being a full-fledged Israeli citizen. That can't be achieved without occupation, but anything less than that is perhaps a prescription for the perpetuation of more of the same, which none of us want.
So, Reem, if we kind of accept this narrative, which I think is fascinating, and one of the downsides of this of the nature of this particular event that we have is that we don't have hours and hours to tease it out. You're both board members of NIF. You're both instrumental in shaping the organization's direction in trying to achieve the level of justice and equality for all Israeli citizens that we want, Jewish and Palestinian. So, Reem, how is that path laid by NIF? Why are you part of NIF in order to try and build out the reality that we share?
I mean, I'm part of the NIF because I believe that we are able to bring a different language. I mean, though we're not strong, with supporting all the organizations that we would love to support, but we can't say that the New Israel Fund did not change the language and did not. I think we are the people who brought the language of shared society and, like to look for other language, other combining language, I would say. So I'm so proud to be part of the New Israel Fund family, and I'll keep working until eventually, as everyone say, every organization, like the dream of every organization is to stop to exist. So hopefully we'll reach a place that that everything is so perfect that we do not need the New Israel Fund.
Naomi, are you also hoping to wish yourself out of existence? Is that why you're part of NIF?
Well, at my age, it's going to happen sooner rather than later. But having said that, I truly believe in the power of NIF. I agree with every word that Reem said. And I want to add my 2 cents. I also understand that the little changes that we make on the ground, the projects that bring people together, the empowerment that we encourage among the disenfranchised and the weak and the disempowerment that has been too much a part of Israel, and we're trying to release all these undercurrents, the pride we're instilling in people in their own identity, in their own background, in their own narratives, in their own history, all that eventually accumulates into providing the basis for much more fundamental change, the signs of which we're already beginning to see today. So every investment, every project that goes in this direction is a true contribution to an equal and just and free society for all. And I believe if we keep trying, hammering away at these things, we can actually begin to feel that they're making a difference. That's why I'm so proud of being involved with NIF. And if I may add, it's a pleasure to see NIF 10 years later flourishing as it should be. Bravo to you all.
Well, thank you, Naomi, for your wonderful words. Thank you, Reem, to both of you for being part of this short little stanza of our celebration of 10 years of NIF Australia. Let's hope that we can continue with your partnership, with your guidance and your leadership to pave that path of justice and democracy for all. Thank you for joining our celebration tonight. Thank you for being the inspirational figures that we need you to be in this moment.
התקופה של יום הגירוש זה הייתה התקופה הכי קשה שהייתה לי בחיים. בחיים לא ראיתי את אמא שלי כל כך גם בוכה עצובה. היו פעמים שאמרה לי, אם אתה מקבל את הצו גירוש, אני ישר חוזרת אותך עם כל האחים. אני לא משאירה אותך פה לבד. זה דבר קשה לצפות, זה בן אדם אחרי גיל 18, ישר לא חי עדיין את החיים, לשלוח אותו למקום שהוא לא מכיר.
דרך העבודה שלי נחשפתי לסיפורים שלהם, וכך החלטתי להתנדב עם מועדון הנוער של אסף, ואני עושה את זה כבר 7 שנים. שיש להם עתיד לא ברור. עתיד לא ברור מבחינת איפה הם יהיו, אם יכולים ללכת ללמוד באוניברסיטה. אם הם יחזרו למקום לדרום סודן או לכל אריתריאה או כל מקום אחר. הם חיו בפחד. הפחד שלהם היה הפחד שלי שהם יגורשו מפה, וזה באמת הרג אותי.
עדיין לא צריך לוותר, כי אי אפשר לדעת מתי זה עוד פעם יקרה.
كنت أشتغل سائق تاكسي من برطة على جنين 5 سنين. نفس اليوم اللي صار معي فيه الحادث الصبح كان الوضع عادي جدا، رحت أخذت ركاب أو مواطنين نقلتهم من برطة على جنين ومن جنين لبرطة. تفاجأت في وجود مستوطنين بجانب مستوطن الدوتان مسكرين. لما وصلت وكان المحصول مسكر وقفت، اجى مستوطن حكى لي ارجع من هون، قلت له هاي الطريق الوحيده اللي بتؤدي لبيتي ما فيش طريق ثاني. بعدها حاول يبهدلني في الكلام، أنا ما سمعت منه، ضليت مكاني. راح جاب معاه كمان مستوطن ثاني، أجا بحكي مين اللي بدوش يرجع، وحكيت له أنا، كان بلش يضرب فيه مباشرة بدون أي كلام.
What we try to do is to hold the Israeli authorities accountable for Israeli actions in the West Bank.
هذا المكان اللي أنا تعرضت فيه للضرب من قبل المستوطنين، والمكان هذا معلم بنفسيتي طول الوقت، يعني كل ما أمرق عنه بتذكر الموقف. بعدين اضطريت اني لما صاروا يضربوا فيي استنجد في الجنود اللي كانوا موجودين بالقرب من المكان، بس ما كان في اي فايده منهم. لما ضربوني حسيت في الاهانه، وانه انا ما بملك حقي حتى في العوده لبيتي.
I think the feeling of Palestinians being exposed to violence, to damage to property, is something that Israelis just don't want to know. And if you want to call yourself a democracy, you cannot do that.
זה מעצבן אותי שאומרים שאין גזענות. במיוחד במצב של היום, זה מתסכל. כי אנחנו חווים את זה. קורה במקומות עבודה, זה קורה בבית ספר, זה קורה בגנים, אתה לא יכול להתווכח עם בן אדם שחי את זה וחווה את זה מגיל קטן. אני כרגע עובדת בבית חולים כאחות. באתי למשמרת ערב, הייתי מופקדת על כמה חדרים, ובאחד החדרים התקבל מטופל, כשהייתי צריכה לזרוק את המזרק מחט, הייתי צריכה לזרוק אותו לפח שהוא מיועד לחפצים חדים. והבת שלו ישבה עם הקורסה בדיוק בפינה שהפח היה נמצא שם. אז ביקשתי ממנה שאם יכולה לזוז עם הקורסה, זה יעזור לי מאוד. ואז שמעתי אותה אומרת, אתיופית מסריחה, תחזרי לאתיופיה. עמדנו אחת מול השנייה, והיא פשוט סתרה לי. לא כאבה לי הסתירה, יותר היה קשה לי איך שאני הרגשתי. כאב לי להבין שיש את הדבר הזה ועוד במקום כאילו ציבורי. העבודה הזאת היא באמת מספקת. אני מאוד אוהבת את העבודה שלי. אני מטפלת בחולים וזה גם ממלא אותי. אבל לבוא לתת מעצמך ושיגידו לך דברים כאלה במקום עבודה, זה חשתי השפלה מוחלטת. אני אגיד לך את האמת, אני מיואשת מהמדינה הזאת.
I wish all Ethiopian Israelis were feeling that they are part of the Israeli society. At the end of the day, when they go and experience these, racist or discriminatory acts in their daily lives, they slowly start to feel that they are not welcomed, they are not accepted. We are teaching the Ethiopian Israelis, this is their country, this is a democratic country, they have rights.
שיפסיקו עם המקרה הגזענות האלה. שיפסיקו להתייחס אלינו כאל שונים. לילד מותר לשבת בספסל בשכונה שלו בלי לפחד שאיזה שוטר יעבור. שהבת שלי יכולה ללמוד בכל מסגרת שהיא יכולה. לא שלא מקבלים אתיופים, כי ישר פוסלים אותם ולא מסתכלים על ההישגים שלה או על מי שהיא. צריך לקבל כל בן אדם באשר הוא. לא משנה מאיפה הוא הגיע או מה הצבע העור שלו.
The mobile clinic is a group of doctors who goes every Saturday to the West Bank together, Jewish, Arab, Israeli, Palestinian doctors who goes and open a one-day clinic in a different village. So from a school that exists there, we go and we're arriving in the morning, and for 4, 5, 6 hours, it becomes a clinic. Every doctor takes a room, and we bring also medications with that, and then all the village, and many times it's people from around villages are coming and get treatment.
الوجع كان والله ضغط كثير، ظل عندي وجع راس، يعني مثل حدا مثلا بده إشي مني أو حدا يرن على الجرس مثلا ما اسمعش
معها، يعني تفكر إنه إحنا بنحكيش يعني معاها إشي، هي مش سامعينه.
تفهم الحكي عن طريق الشفايف، فحكوا لي إنه بتيجي جمعيات على المناطق، على البلدان، على القرى، على المخيمات. شوفوا حاولوا إنكم تتواصلوا معهم، بلكي يساعدوكم. هسا بدها سماعات، والسماعات مبلغ عالي، يعني مش بسيطات ثمنهن، فوق ال 4000 شيكل 5000 شيكل. مش قدرتنا عنا نأمنهن، وركبوا لنا سماعة عن طريق الإخوان في الجمعية، مشكورين.
بعد ما ركبتوا لها السماعات صارت يعني منيحة.
بالأول كنت يعني كثير يعني متضايق، بس الحمد لله رب العالمين يعني بعد ما ركبوا لي السماعات يعني صرت أحسن بكثير.
Everyone who supports us is supporting the basic health rights to everyone who lives here in Israel and the Palestinian territories. We try to change the reality, change the policy. To support us, it's to support a better society, a better future for everyone.
We're so grateful to our community for coming together to be able to support those 4 organisations and the dozens and dozens after as well. On top of that, millions of dollars over the last 10 years that we've been able to invest in Israeli civil society, some of the most important work that's being done today to uphold the values of Israel's Declaration of Independence. So thank you to everybody who is part of our community and contributes to that work. We talk about it all the time. The other half of what NIF Australia does, not just in Israel, but in Australia, is to have important and challenging conversations inside the Jewish community to lead the discussion here about how to shape that better reality on the ground for Israelis and Palestinians. People in Australia, they take notice of that, and we're thrilled to have been able to, over the years, have been able to host some internationally iconic authors, politicians and activists to join our event, to give us support, to share their views with this incredible community that we have. And tonight we're thrilled to have Senator Penny Wong, Australia's Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister. She's joining us to talk about some of the threats facing liberal democracy around the world and what Australia can do and what Australia's role can be in Israel-Palestine. So welcome, Senator Wong. Thank you for joining our event tonight celebrating 10 years of NIF in Australia. I want to start with the big picture, and hopefully you can give us a sense from your perspective of what are the big threats facing liberal democracies like Australia, like Israel, around the world today.
Well, first, congratulations on 10 years, and thank you for your continued contribution to our democracy. I really respect and appreciate the contribution all of you, and you personally make. Well, democracy is under a fair bit of pressure, isn't it? And to reflect why is that? What are some of the drivers of that? We would look at populism, we would look at disinformation, we would look at the erosion of trust in democracy, and obviously also I think the rise of intolerance and hatred. I would make this point, and I try to make it quite often in the domestic political debate. Democracies do depend or require a certain degree of acceptance of facts in order then to have a democratic contest around, given those facts, what we then do, whether it's on policy or the way forward. And I fear that we, in this era of disinformation, in this era of fragmented media, in this era of people listening to other people who think like that, our capacity to actually collectively understand facts and then be able to contest the path forward on those facts is diminished. And that is really bad for our democracy.
Is there has there been a broader erosion beyond the kind of public discourse, a broader erosion of democratic values that you're worried about? In Israel, we talk a lot about, threats to the independence of the judiciary, threats to minorities, which goes kind of beyond just racism in the public square, but also sometimes from the top down in government as well. How do you even begin from a place in the parliament to try and address those sometimes kind of overwhelming systemic issues?
Yes, I sometimes fear that people's understanding of history is poor, and that the lessons of the 1930s, which is not actually just about fascism, etc., but it's actually about the erosion of the principles you describe and the road that sets countries and the world on. I think we always have to continue to advocate and express and support the sorts of principles you just described. And the Jewish people and the Jewish community in Australia, I think, because of the history, the tragic history and the tragic experiences of the Jewish people, have understood that principle matters, universal rights matter, principles which are around, are abstracted from individuals and institutions, but are important as providing those guardrails for democracy. And we have to, they always have to be argued for. It's not like you win them and then you can sort of set and forget. Every generation and within generations, each time, we have to continue to advocate for them.
When you speak about the history of the Jewish people and understanding the collective trauma that we've been through, that's so much of what our message is. So much is about, we understand what trauma is like for us. How can we make sure that not only, and Israel is one of the kind of materializations of it, that Jewish people have a place of refuge, but actually these lessons are applied so broadly. This is what we speak about in terms of tikkun olam and healing the world. So how do we make sure that those values permeate so much more widely? How do people who maybe haven't had that familial experience of trauma, how do human rights issues become apparent to them? How does it become relevant to them in their everyday lives to understand this shrinking global space for human rights?
That's a really good question. Well, I think domestically or internationally, I always believe that you have to locate these sorts of principled discussions to some extent in people's own experience or experience with which they can empathise and sympathise, and to explain, why we believe in, certain universal rights, not just in the abstract, but what this means for people, or either them or people like them, or people with whom they can identify and empathise. I also believe that talking about the counterfactual is useful. So to take people through, in the absence of the separation of powers or in the absence of universal human rights, things like arbitrary detention or whatever particular outrage you might want to reference, these are the things which can occur. And so why we argue for these sets of democratic values and these principles and these human rights is because we recognise what can happen to humanity and to communities if we don't protect them.
So, we don't have all that much time. I'd love to hear maybe more about whether you personally get despondent, but seeing these kind of catastrophes unfold and, you being in the center of the political discourse. But I do want to make sure that we focus on what NIF people really kind of want to hear about always, which is about Israel-Palestine. And so I was hoping that you could give us an overview of where you see and where Labor, I guess, sees Israel-Palestine today and your analysis of what's happening on the ground.
Can I make a comment about the domestic discussion? Because I think that might be a useful way to sort of start it. I think, this is a very, an issue about which people feel very deeply, and it gets imbued with a lot of history and a lot of, emotion at times. And I understand that. I wanted to say, I think that the way forward certainly for the discussion in the Australian community, is to ensure that people can speak and hear, listen respectfully. I don't pretend to know everything about the current state of the government and the modern state of Israel. I would make these points. We're a steadfast friend of Israel as a party, and the history of our involvement in the founding of the modern state. It's a friendship that continues today. That, however, we would continue to assert the sorts of principles and rights and that we've been discussing. But most of all, when I went to Israel, one of the things that really struck me was the extent to which there were two narratives, both of which had historical basis, both of which had a lot of legitimacy and experience, and they were not narratives that were able to be heard by either side. Now, I hope that changes, because it seems to me that the prospect of peace, a just peace, will only occur if that happens. And I want to, in conclusion, if you want me to finish up, is to say I really thank you and NIF for the respectful way in which you engage in this discussion.
We appreciate that. I will keep you for another couple of minutes if I can,
Sure.
which is to ask about what Australia can do. Australia's only a middle power. We're not at the front of the table, but certainly Australia is in a unique position because it does have such a strong and long friendship with the state of Israel, and also with the Palestinians, both in terms of aid and diplomatic support. So Australia is kind of unique in the global context, or at least has a very strong role that it could play. What role and impact then can what we talk about in Australia and what we do, either under you in opposition in the form of Labor government at some point, is able to talk and further that agenda?
Yeah, I do think in politics often just actually being principled is quite a good idea. And I think on this issue, to be principled, to be clear about our view on issues that we don't agree with, where and we have been on annexation, the expansion of settlements, those issues which we considered to be inconsistent with a just peace and a two-state solution negotiated between the parties. Equally, where there is some of the sort of behaviour we've seen from terrorist organisations, that should be called out. And I think in all of this, to continue, as I have sought to, have dialogue with representatives from different perspectives and different communities here in Australia, but in our public position, to be really clear, you can be a friend of Israel, but you can also be principled about the issues that you raise concerns about.
I think that channels exactly what NIF is trying to do, to be
Right.
Tribal in the way that we are dedicated to the future of a homeland for the Jewish people, the inherent justice in that, but knowing that making sure that we stay true to our principles of human rights, of equality, of democracy for
Yep.
all is that way. And from our perspective, the only way that can happen is by ending the occupation, and the only way that can happen is by bringing about a negotiated peace between Israelis and Palestinians. So thank you for joining us.
That way, I think security for two peoples
Exactly right.
can be found.
Exactly right. Thank you so much for joining us, Senator Wong, and look forward to seeing as much more of you as we can.
Great to see you, Liam.
Thanks so much.
Hi, I'm Mickey Gitzin. I'm the Executive Director of the NIF Israel Fund in Israel. I had the privilege to meet quite a few of you when I visited Australia a few years ago, before even joining this organization. So I can say I know firsthand how important is your contribution to the work of the NIF Israel Fund. We literally could not do it without you. In large, I think, NIF is about partnerships. Partnerships between Jews around the world and Israelis. Partnership between Arab citizens of Israel and Jewish citizens of Israel. Partnership between people who feel that Israel is strong when its democracy is strong. Israel that thrives for equality and justice for all. This is the Israel that we want to work for. Sometimes we feel like we are really working and making change on the ground. Really, I remember times when we saw our community standing behind the refugees and stopping the deportation of the refugees from Israel. I remember when we stood together, Jews and Arabs, against legislations and laws that were trying to undermine Arab citizens of Israel. But also remember quite strongly hard times, that the knowledge that we have a community behind us was extremely important. When Israel's democracy did not seem to be so strong, when legislation has passed the Knesset and we felt embarrassed and shamed, but the fact that we were together, people who cared about this place, made a difference. One of these difficult times actually happened just last May, when Jews and Arabs found themselves on the streets of this country fighting against each other. For moments, we felt that the entire work of the New Israel Fund, working to build shared society, is actually in danger. But I think that we came as a community, we stood together, and we started a campaign that I'm very proud of, that is called Voices of Hope. A campaign that I think that every community in NIF around the world has contributed to. And this call of proposal brought more than 600 applications of people, Jews and Arabs, that kept working together despite what happened in May. This showed me personally that the foundation, the infrastructure that we built for shared society in Israel is actually strong. If people, after what they saw on TV, after what they felt about their neighbors, Jews and Arabs, could keep on working together, it means that we were able to create change, to make this change that we want to see in Israel, which is equal for all of its citizens. And I know, we always tell you that this is the most important time to be working on the causes and the values of NIF. This is the time that we can make change. But what can I say? This is exactly the time. Israel has a new government. The political reality is unclear to us. We don't know if it's a time of major opportunities, of us working with allies and friends who are in government now, or actually, this is a time of danger in which we see settler violence in the rise, and things that are happening on the ground, like violence within the Arab community in Israel, as we never seen before. This is exactly the time when civil society is needed more than ever, because we need to work strongly so the opportunities will become much more significant than the risks. And if we are not going to be here in this time, no one is going to do this work. And for this purpose, we really cannot do it by ourselves. This is exactly the reason why we need to do it as we always do, together, in partnership. So I want to congratulate you for celebrating this first 10 years of NIF Australia, and I can promise you that Israel and your Jewish community will give you enough reasons to keep on investing in this very important cause, because we are not going anywhere, and the work is long, hard, but very, very rewarding. So, Mazel Tov, and good luck to all of us for many more years. This was just the beginning.
Well, that just about wraps it up for our evening. I did, of course, say at the start that one of the things we'd be asking for you to do tonight was to rededicate your support for NIF and the important work that we do. So there's two ways that we're going to ask you to do that tonight. Like Mickey said, the real heart of what we want to do now is harness the moment and make sure that the opportunities that lie in front of us outweigh the risks that we see. And so right now, that need is to invest in shared society, in Jewish-Arab partnership, to protect what's best about Israel's democracy. We need to combat settler violence and the horrific toll it takes on Palestinians in the West Bank. We need to stand up for the rights of the LGBT community, of the Ethiopian community, of the refugee community, to give them the same ability to go to school, to access healthcare, and to get married and to live their full lives in Israel. This is the work that needs to be done today. So if you can contribute, please chip in now, support this work, click this QR code that's now on the screen, and join us in that support. The second thing, the other way that we would like you to contribute or to begin thinking about contributing is through a new legacy program that we're launching tonight. The first 10 years of NIF Australia has been about finding our base and starting to make an impact. The next decade, though, is going to be about strengthening and solidifying, about making gains in Israeli society, about leading the conversations that we want to have in the Jewish community. So I'm going to throw back now to Ilana, our board chair, and her husband Ray, so they can talk about the commitment that they've made to NIF.
Ray and I grew up in homes in which contributing to Israel was a major part of our lives. When we joined the New Israel Fund community in Australia, we found a natural extension of our family's values and commitments.
Our involvement with NIF has been the perfect way to get to know Israel and to understand the issues it faces. We've seen Israel's successes and challenges. In particular, we've seen how difficult it is to find common ground between Jews and Arabs.
We all witnessed from afar the conflict in May. The violence between Jewish and Arab citizens in the shared towns was heartbreaking. But it was also reassuring to see how grassroots organisations funded by NIF mobilised quickly to rebuild that Jewish-Arab partnership. NIF funds lots of programs that bring Jews and Arabs together, where they get to know and respect each other, and where they work towards resolving the conflict.
Many Jewish and Arab Israelis want to live side by side in peace, security and equality. These are the people we want to support during our lifetime and into the future.
When NIF initiated a bequest campaign, it was obvious to us that we wanted to contribute. It makes sense for NIF to be part of our legacy. We're proud that our legacy will support activism in Israel that reflects our values.
This is why we've added a codicil to our wills to include a bequest for NIF. It's our way of ensuring that NIF will continue working to make Israel the country we need it to be.
Thank you, Ilana and Ray. Over the next couple of months, what we're going to be doing is get in touch with all of our supporters and to speak to you about how you're able to continue to support NIF through a legacy gift. It's important that we not just celebrate and enjoy the 10 years of contributing to Israeli society and leading the conversation in Australia, but figure out how we can make sure that we're here for the long term, because these issues need continued investment. So look out, you can scan the QR code on your screen now, and you can look out for emails and phone calls going forward so that we can start that discussion with you. So thank you to everyone who is willing to be part of that with us. We're going to wrap it up now for tonight. Thank you to everybody for joining. Of course, we feel like we're just on the horizon. We're just on the cusp of returning to in-person events very soon. We hope that we'll be able to see you all in person in just a matter of months. We've got some great digital content in the meantime over the next couple of months coming out. So I hope that you'll be able to join us for that. But in the meantime, thank you again for coming tonight. Thank you for everything that you've been able to build, you as our community, over the last 10 years. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Have a good night.